I'm reaching? I don't know. Again, I said this was an American's perspective. I'm Jen, and this is Prague, the heart of Europe, and my adopted home. Subscribe to get an American's take on this enchanting city and all things Czech. Welcome to the adventure. Hello, and welcome to my first Czech film review. Many of you have asked if I watch Czech films, and a few in particular have asked if I've ever seen a film called Starci na Chmelu. It's a 1964 Czech film directed by Ladislav Rickman. The title means Elders on the Hops, but you can view it on Czech Netflix, and there it's called Green Gold. It's the story of the teenagers in the 60s who were tasked with working during the summer picking hops in the fields in former Czechoslovakia. I wanted to watch this film without any outside research, without any outside impressions, just to give you an American's take on this film. I'm not a professional film critic, but if you're interested in Czech films, if you're interested in 20th century Czech history, or if you just are interested in entertainment, you might be interested in this film and what I have to say about it. Also, I wanted to mention that I grew up in the United States in the 1980s and 90s, and we did not have any exposure in our school system to culture that happened on the other side of the Iron Curtain. We had a vague sense that things were bad over there, but we didn't have any real details and certainly not exposure to the culture that was coming out from Czechoslovakia. I never even learned any history of outside Western Europe until I was in university, and that was after the Berlin Wall had fallen. I mention that because it's really interesting for me to get a peek into what was coming out of film culture in the 60s and just how similar it was to American pop culture in general. I mean, my parents in the 60s were not picking hops, but aesthetically and stylistically, it looks like these teenagers could have been living in America at the time. They're not sitting around bemoaning communism like Americans probably imagined they were doing. They're just living lives with personal struggles just like my parents' generation was doing in the West. Warning number 2, this review has spoilers, so you might want to go watch the film before you listen to my review. I knew vaguely that this movie was about the Hops Brigade, the teenage hops pickers in the 1960s, but I thought I would see like workers toiling in the hot sun, backs breaking, real misery. Something like the scene in Cool Hand Luke, like almost as if it were slave labor. The movie opens with hops and the sounds of those summer bugs that only come out in really hot weather. And I'm waiting to see these poor hops pickers come on the screen, but instead I see 3 identical guitarists come up from over the horizon and start to sing about the story that we're about to watch. It's a musical! The first Czech musical. I love a good musical. And instead of the sweaty laborers that I'm waiting to see, we see teenagers who are smiling and fooling around and looking like they're having the time of their lives picking hops. So it's a mid-century musical, and I am here for that. As I mentioned, the film is set on a hops farm in the Žatec area of former Czechoslovakia. That's now in Czech Republic. To me, this is the perfect setting for what I see as the underlying themes of the film, which I'll get to in a minute. And this is perhaps where we get the Netflix translated English title of Green Gold, because green, the hops, were the gold of the nation. They were used to make their world famous Czech beer. So hops are standing in as the symbol of the nation's wealth, and the teenagers are the necessary labor to propel the nation forward. And they seem really happy to be participating. In the first song, they even sing about hops. And it's almost too perfect. It's almost as if I've never seen teenagers that happy. So it makes me a little suspicious just how happy these laborers are in the hot summer. But we'll see. A few of you have mentioned in the comments of other videos about the Hops Brigade, and some even mentioned that they had taken part in it. And I'm very curious about this. If you or you know someone who took place in the Hops Brigade, and you can tell me more about it in the comments below, please let me know. I want to know, was this forced? Were you paid at all for this? Was it fun for you, or does this movie kind of idealize it? Was it not quite as fun as portrayed here? Please let me know in the comments below. The colors and the patterns in this movie really reminds me of the style that the American director Wes Anderson tries to do in his current movies. They're sort of faded jewel tones and a lot of focus on symmetric scenes and patterns like in Wes Anderson's films. And I personally dig that. There's sparse but selective props like guitars in the field, and the boys' dorm has these hats on the wall and some sort of gymnastics equipment lining the sides of the room as if to sort of build the boys' strength, but it also sort of portrays them as kind of youngsters needing sort of a jungle gym to play on in their own dorm room. And the three guitarists that brought us into the story, they show up several times throughout the film to sort of narrate what's happening or tie in some themes. And it's really interesting. It reminds me a lot of a 1998 American film called There's Something About Mary, where this kind of kooky singer comes in and sings songs taking you through the film. And at that time, at 1998, I thought that was so original, and wow, I've never seen that. And Rickman was doing it in 1964, and I think he actually does it better. So after watching the film a few times, it became apparent to me that there were two underlying themes. The first is childhood versus adulthood, and this is a common conflict of a coming-of-age story. The teenagers are being pulled in two directions between childhood and adulthood. They play silly pranks on each other, and then later they dress up in a very sophisticated way, and they go to a dance, and they do this gorgeous bossa nova dance, which implies a certain level of adult interaction between the sexes. It's a lot different than the choreography that starts the film. And then at the end of the dance, they all run to have cake like children. So there's this constant push and pull between, are they children or are they adults? On a side note, the choreography in this film is really fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It fits the story really well. And actually, the choreography was done by that guy, one of the three singers. So the two main characters in the film, Hanka and Philip, are outcasts because of their adult tendencies. They're not content with the childish pursuits of the rest of the group. When we meet Hanka, she enters the cafeteria where it's a bit rowdy and everyone's kind of dressed in their work clothes, and she is dressed in a very sophisticated dress and a charming hat. And while all the other students have this ubiquitous tin plate that it looks like, or bowl that it looks like they've been issued, she comes with her own dining ware and her own tray. She skips to the head of the line of children as an adult would, as a teacher would, and she really comes across as a snob, and it only takes her walking from the door to the front of the line for us to get that impression. So the conflict between juvenile and mature starts in the cantina. This is a scene where Hansa, who is sort of like the student leader of the group, trips Hanka and she spills soup all over her shirt. And Philip represents the more mature character, and he defends her honor. So we have an actual physical fight between a juvenile prank and someone who is standing up and being chivalrous. So Philip seems a lot older than the other boys. He has separated himself by sneaking into a loft at night and living sort of like an adult there. And he has a small library he's very proud of, full of philosophers. So like Hanka, he might seem a little bit precocious for his age, but he's definitely the thinking man's character in this movie. He's not just doing what everyone else is doing. He's very separated from the group, acting like more an adult would. Now, when Hanke moves into Philip's flat, they don't have a relationship that is anything close to adolescent lust. In fact, they actually act like an older couple. They sleep separately. She sits there and knits while he reads philosophy that she's not really paying attention to. They really appear to be like an old married couple. And Philip even has a fantasy sequence where he imagines that he's so happy being with her that he imagines that this will lead to more productivity if all of the students were just matched up, living under thatched roofs, that they would be a lot more productive and everyone would be a lot happier, which is quite an interesting daydream or wish for an adolescent boy. I find that pretty strange, but that shows you how different he is from the rest of the group. The second theme that I found really intriguing was the conflict between the collectivist and the individualist. Personally, I thought this was quite a subversive message to come out of the Czech film industry in the mid-60s, considering they were in the middle of communism. But I've read that the few years preceding the Prague Spring, which was in 68, had sort of an opening up or more freedom before it was crushed in 68. So if that's the case, then this film was definitely part of that small bit of freedom of ideology. But still, it seems a little subversive. So Hanke and Philip are not only the more adult of the group, they also represent the individualists. Hanke somehow has really nice clothing from the West or from Paris somewhere, and she represents the frivolity of the individualist of the West. She's always talking about wanting to dress like a person, and I think that means that everyone else is just part of the mob, but to be a person is to actually have an individual identity. So that's important to her. And in this individualist world that she aspires to, there's nothing wrong with frivolity if that's who you are as an individual. Our other main character, Philip, is also an individualist because he has literally separated himself from the group by setting up his house up in his loft. And he's furnished it with these things that he's borrowed or stolen from the adult's house. And you can see how he has this bourgeois taste that's probably not typical of Czechoslovak homes at the time. Now, the others literally call him a noxious individualist because of him taking this place in the loft for himself, while everyone else is sleeping on top of each other in the dorms. Even Hanke, when she discovers his loft, says he's living like a king while the girls downstairs are living on top of each other like feudal peasants. And this is the common critique of Western-style capitalist economies. When the other girls discover his loft, they sort of attack him like a mob, and they come at him with fists full of candles, and they really do have that mob symbology. And they threaten to tar and feather him, typical mob language. And they even have a trial for him, a mock trial, where they say that he has transgressed by turning his back on the masses. And they say that sociability is what makes a person human, so they're really laying on the symbolism here. The antagonist to Philip is Hansa, who is the student leader of the collective. The teachers love him. They praise him for his leadership, for his above-average hot-picking efforts, and they award him with special favors for that. He embodies all of the good of the collectivist society. He works harder than everyone else, particularly harder than Philip. But he's also learned how to game the system. He knows how to get what he wants out of the constraints of the collectivist system. And he's actually a bully to Philip in particular when the adults aren't around. So Philip and Hansa have this rivalry, and it's not only between the collectivist and the individual, but also between the less mature and the more mature. And this rivalry comes to a head with violence. And Philip calls Hansa a new, historically undefined type of swine. And that's the English translation. I just thought that was such an interesting and unusual comment that I really thought that he is speaking about communism, about it being historically undefined. It was new, it was an experiment, and one that was created by the collectivist mentality. Do you think I'm reaching? I don't know. Again, I said this was an American's perspective. The comment just really stood out to me. At any rate, the tension is building. And the state is represented by the benevolent teacher that is in charge of all of the students. She's strict, but she has a warm heart. She even says, there's not much I don't know about them. I can even think like them. That seems to reference kind of a little bit of a dangerous state, a state that's too involved in personal matters and too controlling. And she also is the judge who must decide what to do with Philip when he's discovered living in this individualist way and for having Hanka inappropriately in his room at night. And when Philip is finally expelled from school, Hanka gives herself up and leaves with him. And they leave in a scene that to me really ties up the themes of the movie. They are walking down a pathway in between all the students. And as they are walking, they start to get more and more of a friendly farewell from the students. These students who really never liked them when they were part of the Hops Brigade. And it almost seems as if they're leaving for their honeymoon. They're walking off hand in hand and everyone is sort of waving them farewell. And as they're boarding the bus, the teacher turns to Hansa and says,
Prosím tě, vždyť si to ani nezaslouží.
And Hansa says,
Já ji nelituju. Já mu to těsně závidím.
Now this is a fascinating take from the director and the writers of this film, because this is the golden boy of the collective, and he is envious of the individualists who were getting kicked out. And in the end, the collective turns their back on their leader, Hansa. The act of rebellion by Hanka and Philip has changed their minds. It seems like a quite dangerous message for the film to end on. I'm just thinking of it being showed to audiences in 1964, that the heroes of the film are the ones who refuse to conform, refuse to be part of the collectivist society, and they end up being the heroes at the end. So that's my take on Starci na Chmelu, and on Netflix it's called Green Gold, and I really think it's worth checking out. It's a lovely film, and if you haven't seen it, please do. And if you want me to review another Czech film, or if you're interested in my take on some other Czech culture, let me know in the comments and I'll try to make a video. So, uvidíme se příští týden. Ahoj!